If you were to ask me, what is the most underrated game of all time? I would without a doubt have to say Fossil Fighters. Fossil Fighters was released on the Nintendo DS family of systems in Japan on April 17, 2008, and was later released in North America on August 10, 2009, and in Australia on September 17, 2009. Fossil Fighters has you traveling about to various dig sites and digging up dinosaur fossils. Once you find these fossils, you can dig them up and then revive the fossils into a Vivosaur, which can then be used in turn-based strategic battles against enemy Vivosaurs. Although Fossil Fighters is far from being the most popular game, it certainly grew a following and even got two sequels, Fossil Fighters Champions for the DS and Fossil Fighters Frontier for the 3DS. With that basic summary out of the way, you more than likely have seen these iceberg charts floating around the internet. If you haven't, an iceberg chart essentially shows the more well-known information about a certain topic at the top, and the lower you dive down, the more obscure and creepy things get. So in this video, I will be covering the Fossil Fighters Iceberg, or more accurately, 3 different Fossil Fighters icebergs. In this process of researching, I've decided it would be best to compile the better entries from all 3 icebergs, plus add in a couple of entries myself. Credits for the 3 original icebergs will be in the description, and we'll get into more detail in the conclusion of this video. So without further ado, let's begin breaking through Fossil Fighters Iceberg. Jaden Animations. Jaden Animations is a YouTube channel with over 10 million subscribers that made a video on Fossil Fighters titled The Most Underrated Game Ever, which received over 20 million views. This is at the top of the iceberg because this is the most exposure the game has ever received on YouTube and really shows the power of a content creator. Vivosaurs. To quote the Fossil Fighters Wiki, quote, Vivosaurs are creatures that are revived from the fossils of prehistoric animals. Because the fossils are influenced over time by their environments, many Vivosaurs have powers and physical features that their animal counterparts did not originally have. Once revived, Vivosaurs can take the form of dino metals, small portable objects that can easily be carried and stored. Vivosaurs are primarily used by people who battle using dino metals, known as fossil fighters, to compete in fossil battles, although some act as companions or even as modes of transportation. End quote. Hip shaking. The Dig-a-Dig Hip Shaker Dance is a dance performed by members of the Dig-a-Dig tribe and fossil fighters. It involves vigorously shaking your hips side to side. The dance is seen to change people's words to start with Digga, to molt bug shells, to regenerate lost memory, and to free someone from stone sleep. In Fossil Fighters Champions, Pauline claims to have received her powers from the dance. This obviously leads to the big question, what exactly fuels the Dig-a-Dig's powers? The game never gives this answer, and perhaps, maybe that's for the better. Dinorians. To quote the Fossil Fighters Wiki, quote, the Dinorians are a race of intelligent beings from an unnamed planet. After their home planet was destroyed by Gunash, they attempted to find another planet to settle. They became heavily involved with the events of Fossil Fighters, where the Tacky idols are revealed to be of Dinorian origin, end quote. The Dinorians appear as a cross between humans and dinosaurs, and can transform into dinosaur forms, but we'll learn more about that deeper down the iceberg. Vivosaur Island. Vivosaur Island is where the majority of Fossil Fighters takes place. Strangely, the island is shaped like a theropod dinosaur skull. This seemingly led to many different climates on the island. The island is filled with dinosaur bones and is also owned by the Richmond Foundation. Head fossils. In Fossil Fighters and Fossil Fighters Champions, head fossils are the only type of fossil that can fully revive a Vivosaur without collecting the other fossil pieces. The reasoning behind this is unknown, but perhaps the head gives out the most energy that is enough to project a full Vivisor. The Tripman. The Tripman is a YouTube channel with over 11,000 subscribers that is well known for making a walkthrough for the Falsifighters video games. Despite having lost popularity over the years, his channel still seemingly has the most popular Falsifighters walkthrough on YouTube. Duna is best girl. Overwhelmingly, it seems that Duna is the favored option by the community for the choice between taking Rosie or Duna to teleport to Gunnash. Mole's Secret Tunnel. To quote the Falsifighters Wiki, quote, "The Secret Tunnel is a sub-dig site in Falsifighters where you can find fossils of Xeno, Tricera, Nodo, Shellon, Brachio, and Meoth. It is located in Rivet Ravine, with the entrance being a down ladder in tunnel number 4. To make the down ladder appear, you must first acquire Fossil Chip 2 and talk to the info clerk until he talks about large holes in Rivet Ravine. Upon your first entrance, you will find a large mole man named Limo, who will ask you to help him find his brother, Omel. Proceeding down the tunnel, the player will find a path near an O sign and another with an X sign, with the O's acting as true and the X acting as false. At the beginning of this area, the player will be given a statement and must go through the corresponding tunnel. Going through the correct path 3 times will allow the player to progress to the next area. In the next tunnel, there will again be 2 paths. In one, there is a treasure chest. Going through the path 3 times without opening the chest allows the player to move on. In the next tunnel, Omel is found, giving the player the mole mask. Entering the secret tunnel again with the mole mask will allow the player to find Omel a second time. The puzzles change for this version of the quest. Notably, the second puzzle is completely different and features 3 chests, to which the player must match the emotes shown by the tablet located in the floor, with the ones in the chest. The answers to this puzzle are left middle right, middle left right, and right left middle, end quote. Inaccurate Vivisor designs. Certain Vivisors in the games are not considered to be scientifically accurate. Vivisors such as Tarbo and Xeno are a few examples of this. Frontier redesigns. Vivisors such as Gorgo and Karkar have noticeable redesigns, just like many other Vivisors in the 3rd installment. Revival technology. The revival technology used to revive Vivisors was discovered from a crashed Ainorian spaceship, where Mr. Richmond and Dr. Dickens kept secret. This dig site exists as Secret Island. Igno's redesign. In the original Falsifighters, Igno's design was a fiery version of Electro. In Falsifighters Champions, Igno's design was made to be more original and more closely resemble the T-Rex design. Televised tournaments. It's certainly not hard to believe that Fossil battles were broadcasted around the world, considering they also have live commentary to go with them, and also seem to utilize drones to record the battles. Neon pink dung. Strangely enough, the fossilized dung which can be discovered in Falsifighters possesses a neon pink colorization. One could argue it gains color from the environment, the same process Vivisor fossils go through, but the neon pink color is not a known Vivisor class. The man who collects these fossils, Nick Knack, perhaps knows more about the fossils than we do. Perhaps they have alien origin, as Nick Knack's other obsessions could point to this. Knack takes 30 pieces of fossilized dung, perhaps pointing to the biblical number of embarking on a given duty. Falsifighters Champions further pushes the mystery, as Lord Tonzilla features what seems to be the dung fossil on his head. Perhaps the fossil isn't even dung after all, perhaps it's a shell, something alien within. Manga. Manga was written for each of the 3 Falsifighters games. 30 chapters were written for the original, a 16-page manga was written for Champions, and a 2-volume manga series was released for Frontier. Interestingly enough, Frontier's manga is the only one out of the 3 to not be a direct adaptation of the story, and tends to be more violent than that of the others. If you're interested, you can find a link in the description of this video to view some of the manga for yourself. Live action ads. A series of live-action ads were made to promote the release of Falsifighters. You can find a link to view them in the description of this video. Zonga Zonga. To quote the Falsified Wiki, quote, Zonga Zonga is an ancient sorcerer who ruled the Calistio Islands before the current time, and Falsifiers champions, and most likely Falsifiers as well. He has the ability to take control of people's bodies by inserting his skull into others and knocking their skull out. When a body got old, he chose a new one. The people Zonga Zonga chose would be the Majestic Vessel. To choose a Majestic Vessel, he hosted a tournament and gave his people Vivisaurs. They would use these Vivisaurs to battle one another. The champion would be chosen when she/he was the only one left to fight. The people finally got sick of his ruling and seemingly immortality and created the Calistio Pipsqueak, which knocked out Zonga Zonga's skull out of the Majestic Vessel's body. After the skull was knocked out, Zonga Zonga couldn't possess another body for a short time. People used this time to lock him up in the stone pyramid in a chest. Years later, before the doors opened to the fossil park, Joe Wild West stumbled upon the stone pyramid in the jungle labyrinth. He had gone inside and opened the stone chest only to get possessed by Zonga Zonga himself. End quote. Dina the Falsifier. Dina the Falsifier is a YouTuber with roughly 1.52k subscribers who is most notable for uploading the Falsifier series soundtrack. Champions DLC. Bonus data was released for Falsifiers Champions, adding extra content for the game. To access the bonus data, the player must first have unlocked the Fossil Cannon in Story Mode. Once the player has downloaded the data, Fossil Rocks, each with either a Dino Medal or an event-related key item attached, will appear on their fossil line. The player can collect them at any time. Here is a list of obtainable content through the bonus data, Frigi and Igno Dino Medals. Bonus data exclusive Vivisaurs Frigi and Igno were released in North America on December 25, 2011. Each of their own Dino Medals can be collected directly from Fossil Rocks on the fossil line. Dragon Message Card. The Dragon Message Card was released in North America on January 1, 2012. It can be collected from a Fossil Rock on the fossil line and grants the player access to 3 post-game side quests: Duna's Due, Rapton's Rage, and Dinal's Debut, through which they can obtain the Vivisaur's Dinomaton, Duna, Rapton, and Dinal. Bone Message Card. The Bone Message Card was released in North America on January 16, 2012. It can be collected from a Fossil Rock on the fossil line and grants the player access to 2 side quests: Ryan's Request and Ryan's Challenge. Ryan's Request can be completed as soon as the player obtains the message card, while Ryan's Challenge is only available in the post-game. Through these side quests, the player can obtain the Ryan Mask, the Favor and Ryan Icons, and the exclusive Vivisaur Salata. Unlocking the Dinorians. After beating the original Fossil Fighters, King Dinal is available to duel again to unlock the Dinorian characters. In Champions, once obtaining the Dragon Node via Wi-Fi, Dinal can be dueled in the Stone Pyramid to unlock the Dinorian characters. Prima Guide. Quote to Falsifiers Wiki, quote, The official Falsifiers Prima Game Guide is a strategy guide published in 2009 by Prima Games and written by Fernando Bueno. It details possible strategies for all fossil battles in the original game, as well as providing other information such as maps and Vivisaur descriptions. The book consists of 8 sections: the introduction, the cast, digging for adventure, fossil fighting, a walkthrough, the ossuary, an alternative name for the fossilary, treasures, and data. The walkthrough is the largest section and is broken into smaller sub-segments which cover the individual chapters and the side missions. End quote. The guide is well known for its many inconsistencies, so strap in, because I'm about to read all of them mentioned on the Falsifiers Wiki. Quote, Rosie's portrait for her cast bio features some misaligned text by her hands. The cast section features screenshots of the game for characters without official artwork. The hero and/or Rosie are notably absent from these screenshots. Even for scenes where they would normally be visible, by observing closely it becomes clear that the characters were removed in a photo editor with varying degrees of success. Duna's image does not remove Rosie completely, and the very tip of her pigtail is visible. The guide falsely implies it is possible to receive different starter Vivisaurs besides Spinax. The guide claims that the player is unable to enter any rooms besides their own upon first arriving at the Relic Hotel. In reality, only Nick, Knack, and the Samurai's rooms are locked. The guide claims that the player must bring Sam and Arrow 8 new fossil rocks upon first meeting them. In actuality, the player only needs to bring 8 fossil rocks regardless of whether they've been obtained before. There is inconsistent formatting on the names of fossil rocks as opposed to new fossil rocks. While the term fossil rock is not capitalized in a guide, the term new fossil rock is always capitalized. On U-Raptor's ossuary page, the icon for regular poison is used instead of venom. On Shuno and Gavorn's ossuary pages, the icon for counter is used instead of inflame. On Lambio's ossuary page, the icons for enrage and excite are swapped. On Penta's ossuary page, the icon for enrage is used instead of excite. On Styraco's ossuary page, the icon for poison is used instead of scare. On Verme's ossuary page, vampiric strength is said to steal LP instead of FP. On Elasmo's ossuary page, the Elasmo combo statue effect is listed as excite instead of enrage. It is incorrectly implied that Opterox will always transform into Neo. The ossuary backgrounds for Phrygia and Igno used a water and fire designs respectively. All 3 brains of Ganesh use neutral designs. All these Vivisaurs are legendary type. Phrygia, Guvorn, Gulith, and Guweep are obtained through special means at max rank. This means a player would never actually see these images in game, so these icons were especially made for this guide by its editors. Igno, however, does have this sort of image when the player first revives them. It uses a completely unique design. Using cheat devices allows the player to see the rank up images for these Vivisaurs, which confirms that they use the same legendary background as Igno. Jaragios Island. This is the name of Vivisaur Island in the Japanese edition of the game. Dinorian Queen. Strangely enough, it is never mentioned that King Dynal has a wife, which is odd as it's presumed that Raptin and Duna are his children. Perhaps something happened to her, possibly being killed by Gunash or dying in the past Dinorian War. However, I did find a fan-made Dinorian queen named Arachi while searching online. Tanzilla is a uvula. The Bonehemoth is a giant, whale-like creature that resides within the oceanic waters surrounding Iceberg Plateau. After being swallowed by the creature, the hero meets Lord Tanzilla. Given his appearance and name, it's not hard to believe that Tanzilla is actually the whale's uvula. Raptin and Champions. The hero talks to Raptin after finishing the main story in Fossil Fighters. Raptin says he would like to battle, but King Dynal has banished him from assuming his battle form. However, Dynal uses him in a fossil battle in Champions, causing one to presume that Raptin somehow redeemed himself, or Dynal is not using the actual Raptin but a copy made possible by the metal. Or perhaps the usage of time travel is the explanation, pointing towards the Dinorians visiting Earth in the past. Rosie is a Yondir. Yondir is a term used for a person who is initially loving and caring to someone they have a strong affection for until their romantic love, admiration, and devotion becomes feisty and mentally destructive in nature through either overprotectiveness, violence, brutality, or all 3 combined. The definition of a Yondir perfectly describes Rosie's personality, therefore making her a Yondir. Nodo. The Vivisaur Nodo has the highest natural defense of any non-Super Evolver Vivisaur. Nodo can have the highest possible defense stat in the entire game series, 65, by integrating a 100-point silver body fossil to it. Sandal Fossil. It is seemingly confirmed that the Sandal Fossil from the original Fossil Fighters game could be one of Dr. Dickens' sandals. Stone slabs scattered around the starship crashed at the secret island state that Dickens lost his sandals while traipsing about the ancient world. This explains why Nick Knack would have specific interest in this fossil. Rock Barrier and Dusty Dunes. In the dig site Dusty Dune from Fossil Fighters Champions, a secret entrance is blocked by a set of immovable rocks. Many theorize that perhaps led to a removed DLC fossil site, or perhaps it would allow the player to return to Seabed Cavern after beating the main story. Or perhaps an even darker secret lies behind the rocks. Oxygen in Woolbeard's ship. For some odd reason, oxygen is present throughout Woolbeard's ship despite being underwater. Perhaps there is a supernatural explanation behind this, as Woolbeard is seemingly a ghost. Bulwark and Champions. Bulwark of the BB Bandits can seemingly be seen bathing in the hot water over at the Hot Spring Heights dig site in Fossil Fighters Champions. Two endings. The endings of the original Fossil Fighters differ depending on whether you chose Rosie or Duna to go with you to fight Gunash. If you choose Rosie, she will lose her memory after commencing the stone sleep, until being brought back by the hip-shaking dance. If you choose Duna, she will be stuck in stone sleep until being freed by the hip-shaking dance. Samurai. To quote the Fossil Fighters Wiki, the samurai lives in the first room on the right side of the hotel. While he is present there throughout the game, he will not let the hero in until he becomes a master fighter. Once the hero does so and enters his room, the samurai tells the hero he seems like a worthy opponent, instructing him to come to the Fossil Stadium's common room when he is ready for a battle. If the hero defeats the samurai, he will acknowledge him as a samurai master and reward him with a samurai mask. After his loss, he returns to his room where the hero can battle him at any time. End quote. Spectrobes. Spectrobes is a space-focused video game released on March 6 of 2007, which features remarkably similar features to Fossil Fighters, mainly how both games utilize a digging minigame. One would wonder if the makers of Fossil Fighters had got inspiration from Spectrobes. Spin-off manga. Along with the mainline manga, some spin-offs are made which don't directly follow any plotline from the games. These installments of manga include Favor's Dinosaur Chronicles, a spin-off 2-volume manga series created by Makoto Higioka. Follows an original protagonist, Favre, and his many adventures on Fossil Fighter Island with his friend Marco. Favre makes a cameo on Fossil Fighters Champions as an icon. The next and final manga piece is Ryan's Great Adventural, the second spin-off manga series by Makoto Higioka, this time based off of Fossil Fighters Champions. It follows Ryan, also known as Line, and his adventures before and after joining the BB Brigade. The series is noteworthy as Ryan makes an appearance in Champions through bonus content. Makoto Higioka is given a special thanks in the credits. Unused music. Fossil Fighters Champions features an unused music file that fits that of an intense battle, race, or timed event. Here, give it a listen. Title Jr. Title Jr. appears in Fossil Fighters Champions to give the player the option to change his name. He is the presumed son of Title, who serves the same purpose in the original game. IGN Hate. IGN gave the original Fossil Fighters a 5.9 review and called it a shameless ripoff of Pokemon. He also said that the game reuses known features lazily. Knotwood Forest Glitch. This is an entry that I myself personally experienced while trapped in the pyramid at the Knotwood Forest, second dig site of the game. While there, a glitch will occur where you cannot locate or dig up the exit to escape. This is a game-breaking glitch, as you cannot progress further in the game without escaping the room. The player is forced to start a new file, but thankfully, this happens rather early on in the game, so it's not that big of a deal. Bottom Sub Bay Negative Emotional Aura. Bottom Sub Bay is the fourth dig site in the original Fossil Fighters game. It's the only dig site in the game to take place underwater. As a result of this, the dig site gives off a dreary mood as the waves shake back and forth on the player's screen. Dentrus Shark's Guard the Watery Grave as an eerie tune plays in the background. To add to all of this, a sunken pirate ship is one of the areas of the dig site. The ship is filled with strange inconsistencies, and the fact that it's haunted by its captain ghost just makes the whole thing even creepier. I can certainly say for myself that a somewhat negative vibes come off into place. It's not a dig site to revisit too often. Gunash Size. The final boss in the game, Gunash, is a ginormous planet-eating monster that has a dark history with Dinorian. Gunash himself must be extraordinarily large to be eating planets whole. This means that at the minimum, Gunash's head is 8,000 to 9,000 miles in diameter, and thus its minimum total length is around 18,000 miles. conservatively estimated. An even scarier thought is that perhaps Gunesh increases size upon eating, similar to that of the Screaming Death, the How to Train Your Dragon franchise. Another interesting concept is that perhaps in Gunesh's life cycle, he began as a living planet, growing additional features later on, as suggested by his planet-shaped head. Champions DLC is still downloadable. Although through normal methods, the Fossil Fighters Champions DLC is no longer available, there is a way to cheat the system. Going over to the DS settings, make sure that you have a connection established. Then enter 172.104.088.237 in the DNS section. This actually works, believe it or not. A full tutorial will be in the description so you can test it out yourself. Main Dinorians are all a family. In the Fossil Fighter series, only 3 of the Dinorians are actual characters. The other Dinorian NPCs are just simply that, NPCs. It can perhaps be assumed that the 3 main Dinorians are all a family, as they are almost always seen together and look distinct to the other Dinorians. UFO behind rock and dusty dunes. In the dig site Dusty Dunes from Fossil Fighters Champions, there is a character by the name of Lucy. What she tells you is quite strange. Quote, "Sometimes I see things flying over this dig site, and I never know quite what they are. Weird, huh? Do you think someone should maybe look into that?" End quote. One could assume that perhaps behind the immovable rock found at the dig site, that the UFO seemingly implied by Lucy is landing somewhere out there. Another interesting fact is that despite having a palm tree in the logo, the palm tree never actually appears in the dig site. Rosie's family is from German descent. I'll admit, this was a rather strange entry on one of the icebergs. The only thing I could figure was that Rosie's outfit is similar to a common Germanic female outfit. However, Richmond is actually a French descending last name, but I suppose it is still possible that Rosie's ancestors had adopted some Germanic customs. Treasure Lake Hidden DLC. This entry is somewhat mixed on info, but I'll try to do my best to explain this entry. Apparently, on one of the DLC Fossil Rocks from Fossil Fighters Champions, there is a lake message card that pops up in receiving it. However, this DLC pack was never distributed to North America, further plunging it below the ocean surrounding this grand iceberg. The DLC itself unlocks a special area on the dig site, Treasure Lake, and allows the player to unlock the rare Vivisaurs of the dig site much easier. Zonga Zonga creates the Bonysaurs. Calio Slablet number 3 from Fossil Fighters Champion states, "In ancient times, the immortal source for Zonga Zonga, ruler of the kingdom of Calistio, would compel his people to participate in tournaments as a means of choosing a new body for him to occupy. For this purpose, he resurrected Zombiesaurs and presumably Bonysaurs from fossils and gave them to participants to battle with. Eventually he was overthrown and he was sealed in the stone pyramid alongside the Bonysaur so that he could never steal another body again. Many centuries later, Joe Wild West entered the stone pyramid and opened a chest containing Zonga Zonga's skull, allowing him to escape and steal Joe's body. The real Joe then took on the alias of Don Boneyard and formed the Bare Bones Brigade, giving its members the fearsome Bonysaurs he found inside the pyramid to fight back against Zonga Zonga and reclaim his body." End quote. This seemingly offers evidence to show that Zonga Zonga is responsible for the existence of the Bonysaurs. Seabird Cavern has oxygen in the bottom of the ocean. For a seemingly unapparent reason, the cavern is filled with oxygen despite being underwater. The hero can breathe inside of Gunesh. Another strange case of oxygen being where it shouldn't be, the player can breathe while being inside of Gunesh's mouth. However, I do think that there could be a logical explanation for this, but I'll cover that theory once we travel deep enough down the iceberg. Rose. During the part of the game where you first meet Nick Knack when Rosie addresses a hotel supervisor, there is an error that shows Rosie's name as Rose. And this error also has the text highlighted in blue, which would normally indicate a male character speaking. I doubt that there is a removed character known as Rose, so this is likely just some sort of bizarre error. Head fossils and Frontier. One of the big changes in Fossil Fighters Frontier is that head fossils no longer fully revive a Vivisaur. Perhaps revival technology is weaker around the world than it is on Vivisaur Island. Vivisaur Man. To quote the Fossil Fighters Wiki, quote, "Vivisaur Man is a popular crime-fighting superhero who's mentioned in Fossil Fighters. Though he never appears in-game, he is central to a side quest in which the hero poses him to Chip, a young fan who wants to meet him. The Green Hero Mask, a replica of Vivisor Man's mask, can be purchased from the Fossil Guild for 1,000 gold once the hero has talked to Chip. This mask is the only visual representation of Vivisor Man in the game. Through the events of the side quest, Chip becomes convinced that the hero is a real Vivisor Man. He gives the hero a homemade purple hero mask, saying that Vivisor Man would look more heroic in purple. End quote. Bugland. The Prima Guide for Fossil Fighters suggests the player names the hero Bugland, after William Bugland, who discovered the first full account of a fossilized dinosaur, Megalosaurus. Anti-piracy. When attempting to pirate the original game, the game will continuously activate the question mark screen to try and stop the player moving forward. This is similar to someone pausing your game over and over again. A link to the full video will be in the description. Tyranno and Tripcera. Tyranno and Tripcera are two imaginary dinosaur-resembling creatures that commentate the hero's Vivisor battles and Fossil Fighters champions. It's likely that these two are imaginary friends and are in the hero's head, as they are never actually seen in-game. Tyranno and Tripcera resemble Tyrannosaurus rex and a Triceratops respectively, although I'm sure you could have already figured that out by yourself. Hot Stuff Bluff. According to some of the entries in the Fossil Museum of the official site, Hot Springs Heights Beta 9 appears to be Hot Stuff Bluff. Vivisor Island Shape. As mentioned earlier on the Iceberg, Vivisor Island is in the shape of a theropod skull. So, two possibilities. One is that Richmond carved the island into its shape to showcase the uniqueness of Vivisor Island's Vivisors. The second possibility is that the island is an actual skull of a dinosaur of unimaginable size, which is truthfully a terrifying thought in itself. One evidence supporting this is the fact that Woolbeard's map does not feature Vivisor Island. When expecting the map, it reads, quote, "A world map, that's funny, where's Vivisor Island?" End quote. It's possible that Woolbeard was the first to discover Vivisor Island, and he crashed to his death before adding it to the map instead of it being an actual skull. At this point, both possibilities are certainly plausible, but we will discuss this topic further down the iceberg. Gunash's Brain's Health. When inside Gunash's mouth, the player's Vivisors take on Gunash's brains, Gulith and Guweep. The lesser brains have the same ominous number of health, that of which being the number of the beast. This obviously is here to show how Gunash is an evil planet-eating monster, yada yada yada, but in the lore itself, this would seem to prove a dastardly origin of the brains. Gavorin, the greater brain, however, has 888 health. Apparently, this number signifies prosperity, so it seems a random number. Perhaps Gavorin is the one to allow Gunash to prosper. Debug Vivisors. Debug Vivisors are Vivisors that look normal, but they have different stats, no description, sometimes different cries, and have numbers of 994 to 999. Special Dig Sites. In Fossil Fighters Champions, when traveling to the fossil cannon connected to the Treasure Lake DLC, a pop-up appears which states, quote, "Fly to which special dig site," end quote. This implies that there are other special dig sites which could possibly be the area behind the immovable rock and dusty dunes, and a return to Seabed Cavern after it is made inaccessible. Perhaps there are special dig sites planned for all of the other dig sites. Dummy Vivisors. In the original Fossil Fighters game, some dummy Vivisors have been found. To quote the original Reddit poster, quote, "They all appear after Dynel and have 920 LP at rank 20. Some of them start with only 1 LP, but get a huge LP boost somewhere between rank 12 and 17. They are all clones of other existing Vivisors. 994, Pacrano clone, 995, Delafo clone, has FF support effects, 996, Shoni clone, also has FF support effects, 997, T-Rex clone, 998, Dimorph clone, and 999, Xeno clone. Vivisor Island Fossil Origins. This theory suggests that the fossils found on Vivisor Island were brought to the island and planted for profit. This further adds on as this allows the revival technology to be put to good use on Vivisor Island. It certainly seems odd that all of these species of dinosaurs are all on the same island, and it certainly makes sense to make as much profit as possible given the circumstances. Though one could argue this is the God-given island of dinosaurs given the shape, but if the island isn't naturally shaped like a theropod skull, then the fossils are almost definitely playing it for profit. Iceberg Plateau soundtrack. Soundtrack for the dig site Iceberg Plateau and Fossil Fighters Champions is composed by Brad Buxer, who made the music for Ice Cap Zone and Sonic the Hedgehog 3. It seems Brad has a thing for making ice-themed video game music. Rosie's anger transformation. In the original Fossil Fighters game, when Rosie is angered, her character undergoes a transition to match her mood, though apparently this transition doesn't happen in Fossil Fighters Champions. Dig-a-Dig Chieftain's granddaughter. Pauline from Fossil Fighters Champions is confirmed as the Dig-a-Dig Chieftain's granddaughter. Different types of the same Vivisaur. Dr. Diggins mentions that Vivisaurs apparently gain their abilities from the environments that their fossils were buried in. This actually confirms that there can be different types of the same Vivisaur. Two T-Rex fossils are buried in different environments, and they will presumably have different types. Certainly a very interesting concept to think about, but adding this as an in-game feature could potentially be game-breaking. Project Dental. Apparently, the development name of Fossil Fighters Champions was Project Dental, though I could not find much on this topic. Dragon Bones. This is a Fossil Fighters fan game being developed by Reddit user FossilFighter45. The fan game is actually still being developed, and originally was supposed to be a tabletop game, but once gaining development skills, Fossil Fighter 45 transitioned Dragon Bones into an ARPG. A link to his YouTube channel will be in the description. Champions Quiz. There are images online showcasing a Fossil Fighters Champions Quiz that was apparently featured at Japanese stores on Nintendo DS systems. Prized Painting. A painting found in the original Fossil Fighters game is said to be painted by a famous artist. However, it is also said to possibly be a counterfeit. This painting could possibly show the dinosaur which the skull of Vivisaur Island belongs to, or perhaps it was either made to add to the island's fake lore or to showcase an urban legend. Knotwood Forest, the second dig site in the game, also has totem poles littered around with a similar looking theropod head upon them. What seemingly confirms this theory, as mentioned earlier, is that Woolbeard's map does not feature Vivisaur Island on it. Something even stranger is that not even Mr. Richmond's map features Vivisaur Island. Inspecting the map reads, quote, "What is this a map of? Is Vivisaur Island on here?" End quote. However, the possibility is open that this is a map Richmond found in the secret island crash site, and it isn't even of Earth at all, as it is completely different from Woolbeard's. But besides the point, Vivisaur Island's origins are certainly quite bizarre, and could have literally came from a giant skull. Igno Perks. In Fossil Fighters, if Igno is in the player's team, all of the normal fossil rocks the player digs up will contain head fossils. Fossil Hunters. Fossil Hunters is a game released on February 13th of 2018. The gameplay contains discovering fossils and building your own dinosaurs. Clearly, there is some inspiration from Fossil Fighters, judging by the title and overall appearance of the gameplay. Ironically, many of the comments on the Nintendo Switch trailer of the videos feature people calling out to clear connections to Fossil Fighters. Sardinosaurus. Sardinosaurus is a fossil from petrified woods that's never revived. When the BB Brigade trio attempt to sabotage the spinal pillar, the player is sent to retrieve the fossil of an extinct fish, quote, Sardinosaurus, end quote, because it is the only thing that contains enough calcium to strengthen the pillar and save the Calistio Islands. Fossil Fighters Collision. This fake video game was mentioned in an old Nintendo game announcements leak. The leak supposedly featured upcoming games for April 2019 to April 2020, and turned out to be fake. Fossil Fighters Collision was mentioned alongside Animal Crossing Gold Apples and Metroid Exodus. It is interesting to point out that some of the games featured were released in other ways, as Animal Crossing New Horizons and Metroid Dread were eventually announced. Perhaps one day a new Fossil Fighters could come to the Switch, but it likely will not be named Collision, despite being an almost perfect name. IGN Frontier. IGN had already established their disliking for the Fossil Fighters franchise, and in fact, they didn't even care enough to review Frontier. Which honestly, I can't blame them too much for their decision. Getting the Squickens in the first game. To obtain the Squickens in the original Fossil Fighters game, the player must max out all the Vivisaurs unlocked in the game. This takes a lot more time than in the second game, as in Champions. All the player must do is complete challenges to obtain the Squickens. At the end of the day, the Squickens themselves aren't that strong and aren't needed to enjoy the game, but if you're a completionist, it's a must-do. Dinomatons are powered by small animals. This entry stems from the concept of Dr. Ivo Robotnik using small animals to power his robotic minions. Adding in that Brad Buxer was involved with falsifiers, it's not too far-fetched to conclude that perhaps the Dinorians' Dinomatons are powered in a similar manner. Dr. Diggins is a fraud. This hypothesis suggests that Dr. Diggins is actually a phony. Diggins often seems crazed, and he is suggested as a slob judging by his office. He's also credited as a master fighter, which seems like quite a stretch, considering that the revival technology comes from the Dinorians. It makes sense for there to be a fake doctor placed on the island to keep the revival technology a secret. This would also explain why Dr. Diggins knows about Secret Island, although you could just argue that appearances are misleading. However, it seems undeniable that there doesn't seem to be a reason to have an actual doctor operating the island when the technology itself comes from the Dinorian. Cameos in Frontier. Tonzilla, Joni, and Princess Pooch from Falsifighters Champions are all referenced on a team in the Ostrom Cup in the 7th Scramble tournament. Travel back to Earth. After defeating Gunash, a couple of strange details can be noticed. For one, your trip back to Earth seems to happen relatively quickly, judging by the fact that Diggins is still wearing the same prehistoric outfit. You could argue that he never changed it, as he still has it, even after beating the game, but it's unbeknownst canonically how long the endgame actually is. Even if there is a time jump between the two scenes, exactly how did the player and his partner get back to Earth anyways? It certainly seems odd that they landed on Earth out of all the planets they could have landed on, if they even landed on a planet at all. Perhaps the Dinorians picked him up with their spaceship. That seems to be the only possible explanation, despite not being mentioned by Dino himself. RVM. RVM, who most know as RVM_021, is a strange test Venusaur found within the files of Falsifighters Frontier. To quote Burby100, the apparent discoverer of the test Venusaur, quote, "This huge thing actually has 6 internal IDs dedicated to it, 16, 21, 24, 26, 54, and 55. Trying to battle with it crashes the game. But interestingly enough, some IDs it occupies actually have different stats. Judging from these IDs, there is probably going to be more playable Venusaurs at one point. Whichever Venusaurs these slots were meant for is anyone's guess." End quote. RVM appears as a turtle-like creature with a ghostly face. What's even more bizarre is the description reading picked_book_help, followed by the ID number of the test Venusaur. Some might see this as a cry for help to escape the wretched crevices of Falsifighters Frontier. The full video of this test Venusaur will be linked down below. AR cards. To loosely quote the Falsifighters Wiki, quote, "Frontier added a new way of getting unlockables into the series. Rather than having to download extra data from various distributions, printable AR cards, or augmented reality cards, are available online for players to scan and bring certain Venusaurs to life, as well as unlock special bone buggies to drive around in game with." The original 9 AR cards were released when the website went online, while Pyro Yudi and Master Maul were released on May 20th of 2015. End quote. Unused Paleopals. In the files of Falsifighters Frontier, several unused Paleopals were also discovered by Burby100. Most notably, Dr. Black Raven, the main villain of the game, was one of these unused Paleopals. A full video of these unused Paleopals will be linked down below. Raiden can talk to humans. In Falsifighters Champions, Raiden is the neutral-type Super Evolver of Brachio. The Fossillery reads, quote, "A Super Evolver made by using a gold fossil on a Brachio. It gains sufficient intelligence to converse with humans." End quote. Liu Ren. Liu Ren is the leader of Falsipark Asia in Falsifighters Frontier. In the absurdity of Confucianism, Ren is symbolic of one who is protective of children and overall is known for doing good deeds. Perhaps that is the reasoning behind Liu's last name, and his assistance with the young player's character shows that. Considering he's also the leader of Falsipark Asia, it's not a stretch. Guardian Olympics. In the original Falsifighters game, one of Mr. Richmond's guards stated that he could join the Guardian Olympics. It's unknown exactly what this event is. Be a Ginner. In the original Fossil Fighters game, Be a Ginner is the lady in charge of the tutorial stage. She disappears afterwards, but there is also a reference to her in Fossil Fighters Frontier. To quote the Fossil Fighters wiki, quote, "There is a battle in Fossil Fighters Frontier where an NPC by the name of Be Ginner makes an appearance. While all that is seen of this NPC is a bone buggy, they appear in a fossil battle alongside two other NPCs named Incomer and G Horn, making it very likely that this is a reference to the first game in the series." End quote. Incomer and G Horn likely stands for Newcomer and Greenhorn, referencing the first dig site in the original game. Bonehemoth in the manga. In Fossil Fighters Champions, Bonehemoth can be seen in-game with a mustache. However, in the manga, Bonehemoth is visible without his mustache. Champions Japanese website. The Fossil Fighters Champions Japanese website is surprisingly still available. The website essentially is just an introduction to the game's returning the new features, and also showcases most of the game's Vivosaurs. Unfortunately, the original Fossil Fighters website met a disgraceful fate, falling into the deep, dark abyss. One-Two-Switch website. As just previously mentioned, the original Fossil Fighters website was not as fortunate as the Fossil Fighters Champions Japanese website. In fact, Fossil Fighters website was repurposed entirely. When entering fossilfighters.com into the search bar, you will be taken to the One-Two-Switch website. The only feasible explanation is that Nintendo thought it would be suitable to repurpose the old website into a promotion for their new garbage, sad excuse for a game. It's quite an insult, and certainly is a shameful end to the website. Lawrence was lying. Lawrence is an NPC found in one of the two in-game dig sites, Parchment Desert. Lawrence informs the player that it is in fact impossible to scan in the dig site because of its hot temperature. However, Mount Lava Flow, an earlier dig site, is clearly hotter, as it's literally a volcano. It is certainly possible that Lawrence lied about Parchment Desert as a way to earn the island elite more money, that he was indeed set up by the one controlling the island. Dark Energy. Dark Energy is a mysterious substance heavily researched by the BR Brigade. Dark Energy is known to be capable of altering or enhancing Vivosaur abilities. Dark Energy itself is corrupted energy discovered by Dr. Black Raven, the main antagonist of Fossil Fighters Frontier. The dark energy appears to originate from a dark crystal, which Dr. Black Raven used its powers to transform him into the Dread Raven. When the Dread Raven was destroyed, the dark energy was destroyed along with it. Oviraptor Fiend. Oviraptor Fiend is the neutral type super evolution of Oviraptor in Fossil Fighters Champions. Oviraptor Fiend's name in Japan is, quote, Hell Satan, quote, seemingly pulling from its monstrous appearance, despite Satan himself actually being accounted as a creature of beautiful appearance. The fossilary reads, quote, a super evolver made by using a gold fossil on an Oviraptor. The transformation makes it more vicious and less obedient, end quote. This description seemingly calls back to the wicked Lucifer's pride in his descent from his former status. Zonga Zonga's Castle. An interesting theory states that it is possible for Zonga Zonga's castle to be located in the ruined kingdom from Super Mario Odyssey. This theory may seem far-fetched at first, but both locations feature an unsettling purple sky and towers of ancient appearing material. Perhaps Zonga Zonga was once a member of Crumbledon, and perhaps he intended to battle with the Lord of Lightning to avenge his people in Fossil Fighters Champions. Perhaps the Lord of Lightning himself was corrupted by the same dark energy from Fossil Fighters Frontier. Mihu. The only standard Vivosaur in the original Fossil Fighters game to not be based on a real dinosaur is Mihu. The Ceratopsian Vivosaur appears with actual blades on its crest and also features an overall armored design. Its full name is Mahunkasaurus and is said in-game to be discovered in Japan. However, as mentioned earlier, this dinosaur is not even real, and some theorize that perhaps Mihu is made from an experiment and used in Japanese combat. Perhaps the early Japanese were given technology from the Dinosaurians long ago, and perhaps the Japanese failed to maintain the technology, or the Dinorians took it away realizing their mistake. Some may also connect Mihu to the NPC samurai mentioned higher up in the iceberg. Perhaps the samurai master title was earned back in the day of Mihunjosaurus, and potentially the samurai knows the history of this mysterious Vivisaur. Blambeau is Nomadistanian. The Great Blambeau is a well-known criminal who has fought 3 times in the original Falsifiers Fighters game. Nomadistan is a location mentioned in Falsifiers Fighters Champions. To quote the Falsifiers Fighters wiki, quote, Nomadistan was constantly at war in ancient times and had a terrible losing streak. The frailties of human leaders were to blame for this. The people of Nomadistan made a desperate move to replace the human royal families with canine ones in hopes of regaining peace. The idea worked, and Nomadistan never fought again under canine rule. End quote. It seems that French is the favorite language in Nomadistan, so one could presume that Blambeau is actually Nomadistanian. Holographic Vivisaurs. Isn't it strange that the Vivisaur battles in Fossil Fighters never actually have the Vivisaurs coming into contact with each other in combat? Everything in the original Fossil Fighters game was commercialized and seemingly put on television, so perhaps the whole thing really is just a big show. Revival technology is never actually fully explained, so perhaps the Vivisaurs really just are holographic dinosaurs invented by the island elite. This is a concept that is actually easily disprovable, as Fossil Fighters Champions actually opens with an interactable Allosaurus Vivisaur. However, one could argue that in the canon of the original game, it could be possible that the Vivisaurs are actually fakes, potentially holograms projected from dinosaur DNA found in their bones. Nuts and bolts connection. At first glance, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts seemingly has nothing to do with the Fossil Fighters franchise, so you may be asking, what exactly is the Nuts and Bolts connection? Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts is the 3rd installment of the Banjo-Kazooie series of games. It is firmly hated by most of the fan base, being easily considered as the worst of the series. Nuts and Bolts introduced vehicle-like concepts into the game, but ultimately these features wouldn't go over well, and seemingly led to the killing of the franchise. Now consider Fossil Fighters Frontier. Frontier is the 3rd and worst installment of the Fossil Fighters series, introduced new vehicle concepts into the game, and also seemingly led to the killing of the franchise. With all of this considered, it is certainly, at the least, an uncanny connection. KL33N is the true champion. KL33N is the cleaning assistance robot in both Fossil Fighters and Fossil Fighters Champions. KL33N spectates as both heroes grow in their Vivisaur combat skills, and he also of course sees over all of the past Fossil Fighters. With this possible, one could assume that he could lead a robot revolt and take over the world, but thankfully his programming does not allow it. However, if a villainous individual had hacked into KL33N, the possibilities truly would seem limitless. Goonash is a starship. Goonash is perhaps one of the most interesting creatures in the Fossil Fighters lore, but strangely enough, he does not seem to be a creature at all. First and foremost, Goonash's brains, as previously mentioned, are mechanical and not organic. The player and his partner can also breathe inside of Goonash, and strangely enough, when Goonash explodes, it seems to be a mechanical explosion. This all seems to point to the idea that Goonash was made as a starship by the Dinorians to destroy planets, or more likely that Goonash was an organic creature and was turned into a cyborg to be controlled by the Dinorians. The Dinorian starship, which crashed on a secret island, crashed because of a tissue from Goonash. Perhaps Goonash regained control over his consciousness, which led to the destruction of the Dinorian home planet, and him being able to hack into the Dinorian starship, causing it to crash. Others may argue that perhaps Goonash was made by an enemy alien species, which is also a very plausible hypothesis. Dinorian experimentations. Is it possible that the Dinorian species, similar to the Kaminoans from the Star Wars franchise, are not the same as what they once were? Perhaps the Dinorians merged their organic forms with Vivisaur forms using revival technology. This would explain their ability to transform into fictional dinosaur creatures. According to one of the original Iceberg makers, there is a line in the game stating that the Dinorians are in suits, and considering Duna's disguise as a human being, We never know how far the Dinorians went with their out-of-this-world technology. The player actually dies after defeating Gunash. Have you ever wondered, how exactly was the player revived using revival technology? Wouldn't this have meant that the player had actually indeed died during stone sleep? Well, the answer is yes. Perhaps the player we see after the defeat of Gunash is just a holographic replica, perhaps a recreation of who he once was, as the Vivisaurs themselves are obviously not the same as the dinosaurs that they once were. This would also imply that Duna is brought back with full-on necromancy. These two concepts truly bring a much darker atmosphere to Fossil Fighters in-game. Mr. Richmond is the true villain. Throughout this iceberg, I have been continuously referring to the so-called Island Elite. From the one planting the Vivisaur fossils onto the island, the one covering up the secrets of revival technology, and setting up fakes on the island, the one who stages the living status of the original Fossil Fighters game's hero. This only points to one suspect. No, I have not forgotten about this man's existence. It is the notorious Mr. Richmond. Richmond is confirmed as the man who is running and who currently owns Vivisaur Island. This man is single-handedly responsible for the fraudulence of Vivisaur Island and has set everything up to his own profit. He is known as the most respected person on the island, and truly has the perfect position to run ominous doings behind the scenes. After all the villains who have been stopped by you, the player, perhaps the scummiest villain of all, has never truly stopped. Mr. Richmond, perhaps the ultimate antagonist in the Fossil Fighters canon. Now that we have returned from the Abyss, I hope that you found some enjoyment, or at least learned something, from this thorough analysis of the Fossil Fighters Iceberg. Most of this part is going to be unscripted, but I will say that, of course, I took 3 icebergs that I found on the internet, because originally this was going to just be one, but there's a lot of interesting information on this game, and I will say that this game is pretty obscure, and its sequels are even more so. So finding some of this information was somewhat difficult, but overall it's a pretty good experience. But to give credit to the original 3 icebergs, the Reddit users who made them are cool_kid95, Zesty Zeno, and Spinax. Which I have to give specific thanks for Spinax because he actually explained, or briefly explained, a lot of his entries on his iceberg. So yeah, that will be in the description. And I also want to give a huge shout out to the YouTuber Wendigoon, as he is a big inspiration in starting this channel. It really proved to me that iceberg videos are really a big deal, and I really think that they're interesting, and I'd really appreciate anyone who takes their time to leave a donation through PayPal or wants to subscribe to the Patreon. I really appreciate that, and I also, of course, appreciate anyone who watched this video. I'm thankful for that. So I do have some upcoming videos. So, of course, every other Friday I'll have a new iceberg video, and in between those I'm going to be uploading some tier lists, so that should be interesting. And of course I do plan on doing some behind the scenes, deleted scene stuff for the Patreon, so if you're interested in that, I'll be working on doing some of that. But anyways, that's about it for that. And of course, the last thing I want to say is I give all the glory that this video receives to the Lord Jesus Christ. And thanks for everyone watching. I appreciate it. And God bless. KGV only, all day, every day. Knife 9 out.